They were born in silence. No announcements. No records meant to last. But when the midwife lifted the cloth, something was wrong. The baby's skin was pale. Its hair wasn't dark. Its eyes, unnaturally light, caught the lantern glow and reflected green. Emerald green. In 19th century Virginia, this was impossible. Or at least it was never supposed to happen. On paper, enslaved children followed one rule: the condition of the mother. But nature doesn't read laws, and secrets don't stay buried forever. The first baby was dismissed as an accident, a fluke, a mistake of blood, light, or imagination. The second baby caused whispers. The third caused fear, because now the pattern was undeniable. Different mothers, different quarters, same plantation, same eyes, same hair, and slowly something else became clear. These children all shared something no one wanted to name. The same father, but saying that out loud meant accusing power itself. Virginia in the mid-1800s was built on silence, especially when silence protected men who owned land, names, and laws. Plantations were worlds of their own, fields by day, whispers by night, and the nights were where this story truly begins, because the mothers never spoke publicly. They couldn't, but among themselves they noticed everything. Who was summoned after dark? Which cabin doors opened quietly? Which footsteps everyone recognized, but pretended not to hear? One woman counted the weeks after a night she never forgot. Another stopped counting altogether. They didn't know each other well. They didn't need to. Their children would speak for them. Blonde curls where there should have been none. Eyes too bright to hide. Masters noticed. So did overseers. And when visitors came, the children were moved. Kept indoors, sent away, hidden behind kitchens and sheds. Not because they were loved, because they were evidence. Evidence that something was happening on this plantation that could not be explained away. Not illness, not coincidence, not God's will. Something far more dangerous, a truth that could collapse reputations and expose a man powerful enough to rewrite reality, as long as no one challenged him. But children grow, and secrets age poorly. By the time the fourth baby was born, even the White household couldn't ignore it. The question was no longer if these children were connected. It was how long this could be kept hidden, and what would happen the day someone outside the plantation finally saw what everyone else was pretending not to see. Because once a secret becomes visible, it stops being a secret. It becomes a threat. By the time the fifth child was born, the plantation had changed. Not outwardly. The fields were still worked. The house still hosted guests. Meals were still served on polished tables. But underneath it all, there was tension. Because now the children were old enough to walk, and people were starting to see them. One boy followed his mother to the well. Sunlight hit his face. Someone froze. His hair wasn't just light. It was unmistakably blonde. His eyes, green, sharp, almost luminous, didn't belong to the world he was born into. A visitor asked a question that night, casual, almost careless. Where did that child come from? The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed, and everyone felt it. From that moment on, the children were managed. When to stay inside, when to disappear. Some were reassigned to indoor labor far from the fields. Others were quietly moved to neighboring properties, not sold, hidden, because selling them risked something worse. Someone else asking questions. The mothers noticed patterns too. The same man who passed through their cabins at night. The same authority that couldn't be refused. The same silence expected afterward. He never raised his voice, never used force in public. He didn't need to. Power worked better when it was quiet. And Virginia law protected him completely. An enslaved woman could not testify against a white man, could not accuse, could not name, even if her child's face told the story for her. But silence has limits, and so does fear. One of the mothers did something dangerous. She taught her child to avoid the light. She covered his hair, lowered his gaze, not to protect the master, to protect the child, because she understood something others didn't yet. These children weren't just evidence. They were leverage. If anyone outside the plantation noticed, the lie would break. If the lie broke, the consequences would not fall on the powerful first. They would fall on the mothers, on the children. So the plantation tightened its control. The overseer was instructed to keep visitors away from certain quarters. The children were rotated through tasks to avoid being seen together. No gatherings, no grouping, no comparisons, because one child could be explained. But 6'6" was a scandal, and scandals don't stay contained. Word began to move not loudly, not openly, but sideways. Through kitchens, through churches, through people who weren't supposed to notice, but did. Someone in the nearby town heard a rumor. Someone else added a tale. Another recognized a description. Emerald eyes, blonde hair, always the same plantation, always unnamed. And then something unexpected happened. One of the children got sick, badly sick, and when the doctor arrived, he saw the child up close. Too close. He said nothing at first. Doctors in Virginia knew which questions ended careers. But later, in private, he asked the one question that mattered. Who is the father? The mother didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the truth was already sitting between them. And for the first time, someone outside the plantation had seen it clearly. The secret was no longer sealed inside property lines. It had crossed into the world. And once that happens, control begins to slip. The doctor never reported what he saw. He left the plantation quietly, finished his work, and collected his payment without comment. But silence doesn't mean loyalty. It means calculation. Within weeks, the master noticed something he hadn't before. People were watching him, not openly, not accusingly, just long enough to notice patterns. At church, conversations stopped when he approached. In town, merchants became careful with their words. Questions were asked indirectly, never about children, never about hair or eyes, but about lineage, about family, about inheritance. He understood the danger immediately. Not moral danger, social danger, because Virginia society could tolerate cruelty. It could tolerate violence. It could tolerate slavery itself. What it could not tolerate was exposure, especially exposure that made white men look weak, uncontrolled, or compromised. So he acted. The first order came quietly. 2 of the children were removed from the plantation overnight. No sale records, no receipts, no witnesses. They were sent west, far from Virginia, far from anyone who might recognize them. Their mothers were told nothing. The second order was harsher. Cabins were rearranged. Women were reassigned. Night movement was restricted, not to protect anyone, to erase patterns. But something had already changed, because one of the remaining children was old enough to notice, old enough to ask why he looked different, old enough to ask why his reflection didn't match the others, and old enough to be dangerous without meaning to be. He once followed the master across the yard. Just once. They stood close enough for anyone watching to see it. Same eyes, same bone structure, same pale hair catching the sun. 2 faces, 1 truth. The master felt it immediately. Not shame, fear, because resemblance is something power cannot control. That night, another decision was made. The boy would be sent away too. But fate intervened. Before arrangements could be finalized, news arrived that changed everything. Federal pressure was increasing. Abolitionist pamphlets had begun circulating nearby. Northern visitors were asking questions, and whispers about strange children on a Virginia plantation had reached ears that were no longer willing to look away. The master realized something too late. This was no longer about him. The story had escaped, and stories don't obey property lines. So he did what powerful men always do when exposure threatens them. He tried to destroy the evidence. The remaining children were separated, moved, isolated, their mothers punished for imagined disobedience. And yet, despite every effort, the secret refused to die, because people remembered. They remembered the hair, the eyes, the resemblance no order could erase. And then history shifted. War came, not quietly, not politely. The Civil War didn't just tear the nation apart. It tore secrets open. Plantations collapsed. Records burned. Power structures fractured. And in the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Some of the children survived, not as secrets, but as witnesses. When Union forces passed through Virginia, stories followed them. Stories of children born enslaved who looked nothing like the world that claimed them. Stories of a powerful man who thought silence could protect him. And stories whispered now without fear about who those children truly belonged to. The master disappeared into history, but the children didn't, because when systems fall, truths rise. And what had been hidden in the shadows of one plantation was about to become part of a much larger reckoning. After the war, Virginia was no longer the same place. The uniforms were gone. The flags had changed, but memory stayed. Former slaves walked roads they had never been allowed to choose. Plantations stood half-burned, half-abandoned symbols of power that had collapsed too fast to clean up their secrets. And among those secrets were the children, no longer owned, no longer hidden, but still marked. Freedom did not erase questions. In fact, it made them louder. In towns rebuilding from ruin, people noticed the same thing again and again. Children with pale skin tones walking beside black mothers. Boys with blonde hair standing in black churches. Green eyes catching sunlight in places they were never supposed to exist. At first, people avoided the subject. Old habits die hard. But Reconstruction changed the rules. Courts reopened. Records were examined. Testimonies once punishable were now allowed. And that's when the pattern became undeniable. Multiple women. Same time periods. Same plantation. Same physical traits passed down with impossible consistency. One father. Everyone knew who. No one needed to say his name anymore, because his legacy was walking freely through Virginia. Some of the children tried to blend in. They cut their hair short. They avoided mirrors. They learned when to lower their eyes. Others refused. One young man now in his early 20s did something no one expected. He enlisted, not as a servant, not as labor, but as a soldier. The Union Army didn't ask about eye color. It asked if you could march, if you could aim, if you could survive, and he could. In uniform, resemblance became irrelevant. Skill mattered more than blood, but even there, the truth followed him. White officers noticed the same thing plantation owners once did. The familiar face, the uncomfortable similarity. But now no one could act on it, because power had shifted. The man who once owned everything had no authority left. His estate was gone. His influence erased, his name spoken only in the past tense, and yet the damage remained. Some of the children were rejected by both worlds, too light for one, too black for the other. Freedom had not given them belonging, only choice. Choice to leave, choice to stay, choice to tell the truth or let it fade. Many left Virginia entirely, moved north, changed names, started families where no one knew their origins. But a few stayed, because someone had to remember. Years later, historians would stumble across fragments, church records with crossed-out surnames, census entries that didn't make sense, personal letters that stopped mid-sentence when children were mentioned. At first, it looked like coincidence. Then it looked like avoidance. And finally, it looked like a cover-up too large to be accidental. One historian wrote a single line in his notes. These children were the proof slavery tried to erase, because their existence contradicted everything the system claimed. They proved proximity. They proved exploitation. They proved hypocrisy. And most dangerously, they proved lineage. Virginia never officially acknowledged them. No monument, no apology, no record stating plainly what everyone already knew. But history doesn't need permission to survive. It lives in faces, in genetics, in stories passed down quietly at dinner tables. Stories about emerald eyes, blonde hair, and a truth one man thought he could bury forever. He was wrong, because the children lived, and living evidence is the one thing power can never fully destroy. By the time Reconstruction began to fade, silence returned, but it was different now. This was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of discomfort. Virginia wanted to move forward. Railroads expanded. New laws were written. Old plantations were divided, sold, forgotten. But the children remained. Not children anymore, adults with memories. They remembered being stared at. They remembered whispers stopping when they entered rooms. They remembered mothers who avoided questions they couldn't safely answer. And some of them remembered the man, Not as a father, never that, but as a presence, a shadow that lingered too long, a voice that lowered when doors closed, a hand that never should have touched. Those memories didn't disappear with emancipation. They hardened. One woman, now married and living outside Richmond, refused to let the past dissolve quietly. She told her children everything, not with anger, not with shame, with precision. She named dates. She named places. She named patterns. She told them why their eyes looked different, why neighbors stared, why certain families never spoke to them. And she told them something else. Never let them say you are an accident, because accidents don't repeat themselves across years, across women, across generations. This was design. Elsewhere, another descendant took a different path. He joined the Freedmen's Bureau as a clerk. Quiet job. Paperwork. Records. But paper was power now. He began copying entries before they vanished. Births listed without fathers. Property ledgers with women's names scratched out. Household counts that suddenly changed after a certain year. He didn't publish anything. He archived it, because he understood something most didn't yet. Truth survives longest when it's documented, not announced. Meanwhile, the man at the center of it all was gone. No grand funeral, no statues, no public mourning, just a closed grave and a name that slowly stopped being spoken. But his bloodline didn't stop. It spread into black communities, into mixed families, into places his authority never reached. The irony was complete. The system that obsessed over purity had created proof of its own corruption, and it could never undo that. Decades later, laws changed again. Segregation hardened. Racial categories became rigid, and suddenly those descendants faced a new danger. Passing. Some were told to pass as white to survive. Others refused and accepted the cost. Families split over the decision. Brothers choosing different identities. Sisters living under different names. History fractured, but it did not disappear. Because even when people stopped talking, the evidence remained. In photographs, in facial structures, in eye color that defied explanation. And much later, far beyond Virginia, science would catch up. DNA. No opinions. No denials. Just facts. Connections that could not be argued away. Lines that led back to the same place. The same era. The same man. What Virginia tried to hide became undeniable. Not through confession, but through inheritance. And that may be the cruelest justice of all. A man who believed he could own bodies ended up trapped inside the bodies of those he tried to erase. His legacy did not look like power. It looked like contradiction, and history finally saw it clearly. Years later, when the story should have died, it resurfaced in an unexpected place. A university archive. A graduate student researching post-Civil War census irregularities noticed something strange in Virginia records. Clusters. Entire pages where eye color was recorded, then abruptly stopped. Birth records where fathers were consistently left blank, yet occupations were listed with unusual detail. Plantation logs where enslaved women's movements were tracked more carefully than crop yields. This wasn't random. It was intentional omission. The student followed one family line, then another, then another. Different surnames, different counties, same genetic markers. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't a rumor passed through generations. It was a system quietly covering itself. When the findings were presented, there was resistance. Not because the evidence was weak, but because the implications were strong. It forced a question Virginia had avoided for over a century. How many children were born not from love, not from choice, but from power unchecked? And how many families today still carried that legacy without knowing its origin? Community reactions were divided. Some descendants felt relief, finally understanding why they never fit neatly into any category. Others felt anger, because the truth arrived too late to confront the people responsible. Graves don't answer questions, but blood does. Family reunions began happening quietly. No announcements, no media, just people sitting across from each other, noticing the same eyes, the same jawlines, the same expressions, realizing they were connected by something neither side had chosen. One man said something that lingered. We inherited the evidence, not the crime. And that mattered, because guilt doesn't pass through DNA. Truth does. Virginia never issued an apology. There was no official acknowledgement. But history doesn't require permission to surface. It waits, and when it returns, it does so in ways that cannot be buried again. In this case, it returned through children who were never meant to exist, yet outlived the system that tried to control them. Their existence alone dismantled the lie of superiority. Their survival rewrote the narrative, not as victims, but as proof. And that is why this story matters, not because of one man's darkness, but because of how completely it failed to erase what came after. Silence lost, history remembered, and the truth finally stayed.